I'm Dr. Shikha Sharma, and today I'll be talking about my entrepreneurial journey. So, my journey started with me actually being a doctor. So, I passed out from Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi. And after that, I was posted in the Department of Cardiology at GB Pant Hospital, which is also situated in Delhi. After passing out, when I was working as a medical doctor in the ICU, intensive cardiac unit of GB Pant Hospital, every day as a very young doctor, I was seeing deaths happen right in front of my eyes. And that set me thinking that as a doctor, we are getting patients which are who are coming because of a myocardial infarct or a heart attack, which is a critical event which is bringing them there. And by that time, a lot of heart muscle has been damaged. So, what could I do as a doctor to prevent this kind of a thing? Because by the time a patient comes, they already have had a heart attack. I also realized in the OPD that when we were giving advice to the patients, we were talking about medication, but we were not really spending so much time with the patient regarding what nutrition to have, how to prevent such a event from happening again. And I realized that the patient went back thinking that the medicine is going to do everything, and they don't really have to change much in terms of their original lifestyle or diet. And they did follow some rules for a couple of months, but after a year, most patients were not following any of the advice we gave them. That set me thinking that while there could be many cardiologists and doctors and people in critical care, but there absolutely no doctors in preventive healthcare, which I knew about. So I realized that the robustness with which doctors and institutes like hospitals treat patients, the same robust institute is required for preventive healthcare. So while this thought was still in my mind, but there was no model I could see, there was nothing happening which I could take inspiration from. So after that, I decided let me set up my own thing, and along with some advisor, I set up the first preventive healthcare unit. Unfortunately, since I was trained as a doctor and not really, I didn't really have any idea on how to run a unit. That also in private practice, because as a doctor, I used to get my salary from the government, so I just had to focus on the science. But when you set up your own private practice, it's science and economics. It's science and patient psychology or business or economy or the financial part, which I had no idea. It completely failed. And that set me back because I was always told by well wishers, friends, family, that don't go outside your core skill set, which is of a doctor, because you cannot run something which is in preventive healthcare. And that also had taken up nutrition as a preventive healthcare. So that really set me thinking that why have I failed? And that was unfortunately the first failure of my life. So my learning from that failure was that when you always succeed, you build a wall of fear around you, which disallows you from taking risks in your life. So the first risk I took and I failed so badly, that broke that wall. So in a way, it was something good which should have happened, which the universe wanted to happen. So now that safety wall of always being successful was finished. To get away from that feeling, from that, my ego was shattered because I was always a good student. I took up 3 jobs. And that was just to make sure that my mind didn't drive me crazy. So I wanted to keep my mind busy. My first job was as a doctor in one of the banks running their OPD, which is outpatient unit. The second job I took up was a night shift at a local nursing home. And the third job, which I was fortunate enough to get, was because health television or television, I would say television was opening up. I wouldn't say health television, but private sector television was opening up. And that's the time they required somebody to do some health programs for them. So I kind of, it was a lucky break for me. And I started doing some freelancing television. Now, after I worked for a while, again, the whole thing came back to me, preventive healthcare, and I must set up preventive healthcare. So thankfully, my boss was a doctor in that hospital, and he used to guide me, mentor me, also challenge me to think that why do you want to do this and why do you think this failed and all that. And that was great because it forced me to think outside the box. Now, the good thing was he was not only a doctor, but he was also a management graduate from Faculty of Management Studies, which was very rare combination in those days. So doctors never went into management, but he had done both. So that really helped me to think again and challenge my thinking, my perspective, and the way I was thinking. So after that, in the same nursing home, I asked my boss to give me on rent one room so that I could set up my first clinic of preventive healthcare. The first clinic started doing well, and then I took up another OPD space on rent in the same nursing home. Now that's the time the management of the nursing home kind of put in, they did not like it. They did not like that. What is this happening, and why is she and I was also an employee of that nursing home. So why is an employee now getting into business within the nursing home? So they told me that, look, we cannot give you on rent more places, so you will have to shift out. Either you just stay as an employee, but you cannot be both. And that's the time I got a nice offer from a local place, a local community center, which was in a posh area. So that's the place my first independent unit came up. Now, my learnings from all this was, you have to break down your walls of safety if you really want to do something beyond your comfort zone or your skill set. The second thing is, you have to think not only academically, but you also have to think the psychology of healthcare. Why should a patient want your service? Why should a patient even pay for your service? What is in it for the patient to pay for that service? And preventive healthcare was not on people's mind. So that's the time I kind of gave it a new packaging of weight management services, because that's the time weight management was coming up in a big way in the posh localities or the posh areas of New Delhi. And that took off. That really took off very well. And suddenly I was having so many patients who wanted to manage their weight, taking the services of a medical doctor. But it also pushed me into nutrition rather than medicine, which I was happy, because in any case, I did not want to give medicines for something for weight management. I always wanted to make it natural. Now the center started growing and it started doing brisk business, and so did my name start spreading amongst the higher tier of society. Now the second learning which I had was the club where I was running this business. They called me one day and said, we want a higher share of the profits which you are sharing with us. We are not only satisfied with 25, now we want 33%. That was surprising, because I always thought that since they were already getting 25% of the business, so they're anyway earning more as I was earning. But now they wanted a larger share. So I went back, spoke to my mom, and I said, look, this is it. She said, the kind of share you're giving them, you can get the best of places in South Delhi. You don't really have to do that. And you think about it, what you want to do. But yes, you'll be on your own, so you'll have to take a place on rent and all of that. And that gave me the strength. And I started looking around and I found a wonderful place, which was far better, because the place which I had in the community center, what they had given me was actually an erstwhile storehouse for old wine bottles. So they had actually given me a place where they had dumped their wine bottles. So I cleaned it up and got it done and made it very beautiful with plants and stuff and nicely done interiors. But that helped me. In a way, it's the way the universe tells you that now go into a bigger pond. So you can say the fish was growing and it needed a bigger pond. And the push came from the community center, the club itself, and they literally pushed me out. So when I set up the next center, now I could have set up anywhere. So I started looking at more places, because as the business was growing, I realized that I need to have in multiple locations. I did not want my patient to travel very far. I was happy to travel myself. So I used to devote some time in one clinic. And I also hired a team of nutritionists and under me to look after the patient. So the first counseling was with me, and then all the repeat counselings were with the patient, with the nutritionist whom I had hired as my team member. The second learning or the second challenge which I faced was that since the clinic was doing well, a lot of nutritionists decided that this was easy business. So some of the ones who are not so ethical decided to pick up all the case sheets, the data of the patients, and actually um, set their own clinic along with the patient data which was in my clinic. That taught me another lesson, that while as an entrepreneur you're only focusing on patient care and you're only focusing on growing the organization, the psychology of people who work with you may not be the same. And there are some people who may not look at ethics the way you look at ethics. And so I lost a large part of the business because over the years multiple nutritionists did the same thing. And at a point I realized that even the Ayurvedic doctors I had taken on board started doing the same thing. So it became a continuous problem. I was also rapidly expanding. So by that time, I had almost 7 centers across Delhi. So I was running from one center to another. That's the time I learned my lesson number two, that if you want to really grow, you need to have something to secure your data, to secure your practice, and also make processes, because a one man army can only do X amount of work. But if you want to multiply, you need processes, and the processes become more important than the person. So the only way the processes could be instituted across multiple centers, where standard of care was not there, and at one center it was good, at the other center it was not so good. Realized the only thing which could help me was technology. So that was the first attempt at building a CRM. Again, as an entrepreneur, you just think that you will call somebody and give them the brief of what you want, and they will understand and do it. But unfortunately, over 4 or 5 vendors, technology developers, I failed because they took the advance, but they could not deliver. They did not, one or two did not even bother delivering, and they just left things in the lurch. Now, what my learning was that in my impatience to do things quick and fast, I was not even looking at the right vendors or the right people, and that was my weakest area. That I was too naive and I had no clue about people management and understanding human psychology, understanding who are the right people who you should give the job work or the contract to. And the first person who is to come up, I have to give it to them. So what taught me a lesson is, while I was good at certain areas, but there was certainly certain areas, and one of the major ones was people management and knowing about people, which I was very weak in. So with time, while the centers grew, but so did my stress levels, and so did all these issues. And slowly, the business, which was very profitable, started becoming less and less profitable. There came a time when I realized that uh, some centers were doing well, the other centers were not doing well, and I started having regulatory bylaw problems, like local municipal laws. So those local municipal people would come in and say, "Oh, you have broken this law, you have broken that law," and I was naive. I didn't know what the law was. So they made me spend so much money on things which were not even relevant, and I ended up spending money where it was not even required, where the laws did not exist, and it was just on hearsay that I was spending money. That was another learning for me, that whenever somebody tells you, always double check and verify. Do not just naively believe what people say. Verify, double check, talk to the lawyers, and then only take a decision. I used to find all these things, other than patient care, something which was just a waste of time, and I would try to hurry it up and not put the time and energy which it needed. And finally, I realized that all these things also need a time and energy, and I'll have to make sure that while patient care, I'll also have to delegate some part of that patient care, and that's what I started doing. The next thing which I realized is that India was changing, Delhi was changing, and a lot of people, my patients, were not, because of traffic, because of congestion, were not willing to come for the compliance monitoring what we were doing. So fundamentally, the compliance monitoring required that once a patient signs up for a lifestyle management program, they had to come regularly, twice a week, for a review with the doctor and with the nutritionist. So the patients were not coming, and many of our nutritionists and doctors were doing this on the phone. That set me thinking, why not set up the whole thing like a telehealth center? So in 2008-9, I set up my first prototype of a telehealth center, and that started picking up. I asked around that this is what I am doing, and I was surprised to see that it was picking up. Still, I had a lot of self doubt, because as a doctor, I felt a lot of that you have to see a patient up front, and that is the only way across the table that patient will be happy. But when I saw the difference, I saw that telehealth was doing better than the clinics. So my learning was that people may want something like a personal across the table consultation, but they will always gravitate towards convenience and not what they want, but what is convenient or practical. That taught me my another lesson, that always create practical solutions, especially in healthcare, where it's not something people want. It is something which they do because there is a necessity. It's not something which is aspirational. So healthcare was not aspirational. So uh, so that's the time I started changing the whole model to the kind of model which would help me spread the services in larger space. So thanks to the Telehealth Center, now we were going outside Delhi. We had patients outside Delhi, outside the country, and geography was not a limitation. And of course, because by that time we also had found a vendor who could do the software, so all our data was getting protected in the software. So that was, in a way, a good thing for us. Now, while this telehealth center was there, I also had the clinics. And slowly I was also losing money because the clinics were losing money and the telehealth center was making money. So I realized that I have to now completely shift to the telehealth model. But surprisingly, the biggest roadblock came from my own teams who refused the whole model change, and they became insecure that we're going to terminate all doctors and nutritionists. And therefore, there was passive resistance within the team. And now by that time, I almost had 50, 60 people, and there was a huge passive resistance. People did not want to come to the centralized center. So it took me another few months to spend time trying to convince people of the new model and why they would not be having job losses. But I realized that there is a lot of psychological fear in people for anything new, whether it was my own people or whether it was anybody else. People just did not want any change. Finally, I had to road roll and say this is the end date. By this time, people who don't want to be in the system or who don't want to be in the new way of things will not be in the system. And that's how finally I got all the people into the telehealth centralized model. Was also the time I realized that if I don't look at professionalizing the organization, I'll not go far. But for professionalizing, I had to pick up funding because to hire better people, you need more funds. And I started looking around for funding. And the funding was not easy because a lot of people felt a single doctor, lady doctor, there is no co-founder, there is no management person with her. How will she run the whole place? So a lot of people, a lot of investors did not trust this whole because they felt that A, she's a lady, B, she might just decide to get married and make this business as a second priority. And also, if something happens to her, the entire fund will be lost. But finally, we were lucky enough that I found a VC fund based out of Singapore and UK who decided to fund our organization. That was a big jump for me. That was a vote of confidence. And once the fund came in, I decided that now was the time I need a professional marketing person, a professional people who would come and start growing the company. So as I started putting a professional team, I also realized that I needed more funds. So within 3 years of the first round of funding, I started looking out for the next round of funding, which again was not easy. It was hard. And a lot of time and energy went into finding and looking out for the next round of fund, for the next round of people who would be willing to fund. And I was lucky enough to find a strategic investor who invested the second time. Now, while this sounds very chronologically easy, but it was a lot of self doubt, a lot of disappointments, a lot of doors being shut, a lot of people telling that this model is fine, but as a doctor, how far will you go with the business? So you need to have co-founders who are more business driven. But we still found a second uh, strategic fund. Now, overall, the more important part is that once COVID hit, because we were already in the digital health space, we were impacted just by 10%. Our business loss was only for 2 months, and we actually rapidly went back to our original numbers. And now the investors started looking at us very differently. So during COVID times, we also pivoted to two new models. One was online education in nutrition, and the second was nutrition software, which is Ayurvedic nutrition software. So our initial business was advisory and compliance monitoring for people who had lifestyle disorders by using telemedicine. The next pivot which we used was, basis on all our data of thousands and thousands of clients, create nutrition libraries which are based on Ayurveda. So that became a software. So that's now a software called A12 software. And we also launched an academy, an online academy of Vedic nutrition, what we call Unitus Academy. So today now we have three businesses. One is the legacy business of nutrition advisory. The second is the A12 software, nutrition, Ayurvedic software of nutrition planning. And the third is the academy called the Unitus Academy of health sciences. So I'm very happy with the journey because not only has it changed me as a person, but it also has contributed for my betterment in terms of how I evolved as a human being. And I think it's always work in progress, but I must say that being an entrepreneur is like a crash course in knowing yourself and changing yourself.